It happens all the time.
You hear that story about a successful person or product that leaves you with more questions than answers. There's gotta be more to it. What big moments happen in between, and why did things take off?
That's why we created The Big W, a podcast that dives deeper into the people and the products that are grabbing our attention. Maddie, I'm excited. We have an awesome guest on today, Vanessa Joy. Who is Vanessa Joy?
Well, Vanessa does something that you and I have no idea how to do well, which is photography. She is not just any old photographer. She is one of 40 in the world who can say that they have the designation, which is the coolest word, the coolest phrase ever, Explorer of Light. It's Canon's most prestigious designation that they give.
That it's kind of like the sommelier of photography. I mean, there's not many of those, and I gotta tell you, if you told me 10 years ago that you and I were gonna be amazed and taking notes with a photographer, I would have said, like, what side hustle are we opening? I don't understand. She is a beast of knowledge, and she has tens of thousands of followers on every single social media platform she has, and you and I understand why.
And I think that's what's really cool is she's not just an amazing, world-renowned wedding photographer. She transcended that into an educator, and that's why so many people consume her content and love listening and following her. And she's got thousands and thousands of people around the world who watch her, is because she also educates, and she's a huge educator. It's a big part of her, about a part of her, who she is and what she does.
This is gonna be a fun one. Well, Maddie and I are excited to welcome Vanessa Joy on The Big W. You guys are gonna love this one. We obviously met in an airport, which is not your typical way you meet people you develop a long-term relationship with, where you look over, someone's drinking a glass of wine, we're having 2 beers, and we're like, you look interesting. But this led us to today, and when Matt and I were just incredibly impressed as we've gone through engaging with you on social media and watching your tutorials on YouTube, we're just incredibly impressed with your consistency of your content and how you stay in character. You stay exactly where you are, and that to us is truly impressive. But why don't you talk a little bit about where you are right now? Tell our audience a little bit about what you do on a day-to-day basis and really what your life looks like.
All right. Well, my life right now doesn't look that different as far as, if you're, I don't know when this is posted, but if you're reading this or listening to this during coronavirus time, people always like, oh, your life is so different. And for me, it's, not so much. Yes, I'm not photographing weddings as much as I used to, or at all, because they're illegal. But the day-to-day and what my ultimate goal had been for this year anyway was building that education side of my audience and the YouTube audience. So every day I wake up, pump as much caffeine as I can possibly get in my veins. I exercise usually in the mornings, and then I will just look at today's task list. And as I go through, dream up different things. And sometimes I stop what I'm doing in the middle of the day. I have my task list, but I have this idea. So I just make this video right then and there. And then sometimes I put things on the back burner, or I have long-term goals and stick to whatever the day-to-day task is. So it's kind of nice. I'm very fortunate. I get to do whatever I feel like doing at any given day, except for when I have to go to work and shoot a wedding. But right now that's on break.
So for those who don't know you, they might not understand who know who your audience may be. You're pumping out content on a daily basis. Who is that audience, and why are they consuming it? Why do they see that valuable?
My audience is usually small business owners, mostly small business owners. A lot of them are focused in the wedding industry. So I speak to wedding photographers. That would be probably my primary audience because I do teach photography. I teach concepts, but it's also to, moms with cameras that just want to take better pictures of their kids or their kids' soccer games or themselves. I just did a whole video on how to take a better selfie last week. So that's my primary audience, teaching photography. And then below that is all of the marketing stuff that I do. So every everyone from a DJ to a florist to even somebody in like a multi-level marketing company like Isogenics. They get stuff from the type of content that I produce.
And that's what's so key about having you on our podcast today, and why we want to do this is because the books and the relationships that Matt and I have consumed over the years that have brought the most value to us have been outside our direct industry. When we have focused on our direct industry, you naturally go towards the comparison game of saying, if they're more successful, it's because of X. If they're less successful, it's because of Y, and blah, 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 blah. But when you talk to people outside your direct industry, I find you learn the most. And so for you specifically, it's you get a lot of different angles, but you're primarily focused on education, and education, I imagine, creates attention. But when you educate, is it to actually just tell me what the purpose is? It your internal why? Talk to me more about how education became.
Well, that's a really hard question because there's so many steps to a journey. I wish I had that elevator pitch of here's how I got here and here's where I was and my dream and the bubble and everything else. But it's more rough than that. So when I decide that I want to teach, sometimes I'm inspired by something that happened in my life. I'm like, you know what? Someone can learn from this. Sometimes I just want to make people laugh, and I create content that I know is going to make people laugh. It really just depends on whatever my goal is. If I'm going to look at my big goal, it would be to teach in a way that gets people to the level of freedom that I have to follow what you want to do in any given day versus having to, punch in, punch out, do things you hate and don't want to do. So I really enjoy being able to inspire people, no matter what they're doing, and just find the love of their career again.
When was that, Vanessa, when you went from producing the end product for the client to educating the masses who may not end up ever working with you, may not ever connect with you, but educating the masses? When did that happen? Because it couldn't have started from day one. It must have been a moment when you realized, oh, there's a lot of value I can offer to a larger community.
I was actually a Spanish teacher before I was a photographer. So I know how to teach, just being educated in teaching. My father was a one-hit wonder back in the day, so I learned how to have stage presence from going to his gigs for years and years and years. And when I started to go to photography conventions, I would learn and choose to go to classes and people that just inspired me photographically or with their business sense. And I would get in these classes and I wouldn't learn a thing. Either they were too egocentric that they spent the whole time talking about themselves, or they would try to teach a concept, but they just didn't know how to teach a concept. They would be like trying to teach you the French language, but only speaking German. Like that's the equivalent of what would happen. And I just thought to myself, I can do this. And it was probably, I would say 10 years into my photography career. So it was probably double the amount of time most people take to start teaching. A lot of people start teaching around the 5-year mark, which you can debate whether that's a good thing or not. But around 10 years into my photography career, I was just like, you know what? I think I can do this. I think I can teach. I don't have stage fright. I have no problem. I actually enjoy teaching, not teaching Spanish like I was to, 3rd through 5th graders. That was awful. So I wanted to teach to people who wanted the information. So I started doing that and teaching at small local photography gatherings. And then that ended up being a state convention and then a regional convention and then a, countrywide, worldwide. And now I teach all over the world. And throughout that time, online education was like slowly starting. So I would teach on some of those online education platforms like Creative Live or Scott Kelby or some of those other ones. And every time I went on, particularly to Creative Live, I would have people say like, you could do this for yourself. My husband's a videographer. So eventually we're just like, you know what? We are an in-house production team. So that's what we do now. We just produce it ourselves. We create online content courses to sell. The one that I'm working on right now is an updated social media course. I had one previously and it's kind of outdated. So now I'm working on a new one that incorporates some of the new stuff like TikTok, which I'm avidly on at the moment, for better or worse, but I think it's a great platform. So that's kind of the journey as far as where I went and why I decided to start doing education on top of, serving my clients.
That's interesting. Dad being a one-hit wonder, I did listen to the entire explanation, but my mind went right back to there. I need to hear more on Dad's one-hit wonder. I'm mentally just saying to myself, like, it's got to be like Stevie Wonder, or it's got to be someone huge. So no,
he is he was the lead singer of Ram Jam, which sang the song Black Betty.
Oh, wow.
That is my dad. And now he tours with the Yardbirds. So
that's great. So did you do photography like of your dad or of the group back in the day, or how did we dive into photography?
Photography, my mom was a photographer. So my dad was kind of done with that band by the time I was born. And then I always grew up watching him play with his high school band, with just gigs around the area. And then now with the Yardbirds. And I've taken photos of them and done that. But my mother was a photographer. So growing up, I was actually homeschooled, but she did all the photography for the homeschooling groups in the area. So I would help her set up the portrait studio, whether it was on location or, in our house. She did weddings, which those I don't really remember, but it's always been around me. So naturally that meant I hated photography and I didn't want anything to do with it because I was very rebellious as a child. And now, I ended up going to school. So I was homeschooled. And then my sophomore year, I started going to public school, and my mother was sitting right next to me while I was choosing my electives, and guidance counselors rattling them off. And, you can do woodworking or graphic design or photography. And I'm like, I guess I'll make her happy and I'll take photography. And that was it for me. You could not drag me out of that dark room. I learned black and white film. I was in there constantly, literally getting my hands wet in chemicals that to this day are so nostalgic when I smell them. And my high school photography teacher did weddings on the weekends, ended up working for him before I started my own business.
So that's crazy. It's probably a story a lot of us can relate to, not wanting to do something your parents did and then kind of falling into it and then enjoying it, maybe loving it for the same reasons they did. Your first few clients is probably look a lot different than now, doing online courses and promoting those and selling those. Would love to hear sort of, who those first few clients were.
I actually want to do a YouTube video where I critique my own work, but I make it sound like some people sent in their work for critique, and I just rip apart my photography because it's so bad. But first clients, my very first wedding that I did for my own company actually got a bad review on Wedding Wire for it because the quality of the photos just weren't there. And they weren't. Looking back at them now, I'm like, oh, that is just horrific. Granted, they only paid me $500, so it's definitely $500 quality, probably a little bit more. But my poor first clients. I still feel a little guilty. I want to do reshoots with them.
Well, do they follow you? Do you know if the original clients still follow you or engage with you?
They do, not that particular one, at least that I know of. But my early clients do, even the ones where I was working for the other guy and they weren't technically my clients. Even some of them still follow me. So they still appreciate, they still love their photos, their wedding photos, because they don't see photography like I see it, or art or light or posing. I look at it and I'm like, oh my God, that's awful. But they look at it and it's their wedding day. So there's that.
It's our wedding photographer, my wife and I's, I think we might have been her second gig. I'm not 100% sure. But she was hired 1000% because of her passion. That was it. To us, we were like, wow, you're excited. We're getting married. I can't, our parents aren't even excited, it seems like sometimes. So this is great. So it ended up being a natural fit. You're drawn towards someone's passion for their job. And right. One of the reasons we have you on this podcast is because you're still passionate in your job. It's very, very clear. I mean, your TikToks, which we've watched, are hilarious, but they're educational on the same aspect. What about your job? Where do you find your passion? How does that come through?
I always say it's like falling in love. You fall in love and you get married and everything's great for about 6.5 minutes. And then you have to work at it and you have to find new things to fall in love with. So it's the same thing with any career. you look at it as a certain aspect and that's why you fell in love with it. And, eventually that gets boring and you get burnt out and things happen. And then you have to reevaluate it. And for me, I would say 5 years ago, I was reevaluating it by just trying new techniques and doing, photography techniques. More recently, I fell in love with it again just by trying to concentrate more on who my clients were, which is really hard to do because I basically let myself fall in love with my clients, which means if anything went wrong at all, that meant I was personally crushed and devastated. But I've also had very little go wrong, if anything. I had one bridezilla and one momzilla this past year, 2019. But I didn't fall in love with those ones anyway, so it didn't matter. But I think you just have to look at it from different perspectives and almost search for the thing that's going to excite you when the obvious isn't exciting you anymore.
Do you feel, weddings are, the shots and the pictures, the photos that you share just look like they're out of a magazine. They're just amazing. So do you feel, you're welcome. Do you feel like that is something that a novice or amateur photographer could aspire to do in a shorter time frame because of the education and knowledge that you are able to impart through your courses and online?
Oh, 100%. The education is so not even just the education, but when I first started photography, literally like the internet was barely around. So the only people that I would look up to would be the other photographers in my area. And that's like if I saw an ad they put in a magazine or the paper. There were magazines, that's where you would see other photography, but there wasn't a place for you to go and be, at least for weddings, visually stimulated. Now I can just hashtag wedding photography on Instagram or look it up on Pinterest and just be bombarded. And it can be a lot and you can get into that competition game and, jealousy thing, which happens. But because I'm visually exposed to more advanced photography or different types or genres, or sometimes not even wedding photography, sometimes studio photography will inspire me and better my wedding photography. Because it's all there, that's going to, really speed up anyone who's looking into doing photography or education, in addition to everything that's available online and better tech and Photoshop that could correct all of your errors if you really need it. So yeah, you can definitely learn it faster than I did.
I want to go back. You mentioned the term bridezilla, and I'm not going to ask you specific questions on that person, but I am interested. We all have that client. We all have that relationship. And if you read professional blogs, like, oh, just get rid of them. And that's not reality for a lot of business owners, especially during COVID-19. You might not have that option. Now, this person clearly fell in your niche, meaning weddings. So they fall in that niche. You talked about you tried to look for the positive. What advice would you give to specifically a wedding photographer or just people in sales in general who have to service that client? How do you get your mind around that?
Oh, that's a hard one. So I like to look at it more as this is a learning process. This is a good lesson for me to learn. So my bridezilla combo momzilla that I had this past year, now I know all those red flags. So I know in the future, and I actually did because of that wedding, turn down a wedding that wanted to book me because I saw them like it was a carbon copy of this bad experience that I had before I even was really working with them. So, look at it as a learning experience, but then you could also look at it as a way to better yourself, because we're only going to better our ways of serving the clients that we, truly love if we know how to serve the clients, even if we don't particularly love them. We learn things and character traits through hard times and hard clients, difficult clients, not necessarily through the easy ones. So be grateful for the hard ones because they're the ones that are going to help you grow. They're the ones that are going to test your patience. Then your patience and grace stretches and becomes stronger.
Love that.
Really well said.
Love that. Shifting gears a little bit, I think a lot of our listeners can relate to this, and especially small business owners or salespeople, independent contractors, people who really have to create their own world and their own future. They remember back certain big breaks that they had, opportunities, relationships. I can think of many that Zach and I had, and if we hadn't encountered that opportunity, the future would have looked different than it actually did. Do you have any that just pop out in your head, a big relationship, a big moment, a big opportunity you capitalize on or created?
I think that last part is really the key there. It's not about the moments that just hit you, it's the ones that you capitalize or create for yourself. So I will tell you the very first time I did this, and no one knows I did this, and it was, I guess, 15 years ago now. I went to a photography group meeting, and it was with this guy, David J. And he, at the time, was very big in the industry. And again, this was like websites most people had, maybe about half half of the businesses had websites. They were still relying on yellow pages. So I couldn't find this guy on social media, is my point. I think he was one of the first pictures I put on Facebook. Like, that's how early this was. So we go to the seminar, and I'm with a friend of mine, and the seminar is amazing and it's wonderful. And all I can think is, I just want to connect with this guy. Like, he seriously knows what's going on. And, I'm like, how can I, it's almost like silly. Like, I think about dating, like, how can I get myself asked on a date so I can make this? And, he doesn't know me. So what I did, I waited for everyone to leave, walked to my car with my friend. And I was like, I'm just going to go back in there. And she's like, what? I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to go back in there and see what happens. And she's like, nope, I'm good. Bye. And I'm like, okay, all on my own. And I walked back in there and I pretended that I left my sunglasses and I couldn't find them. And there was only a few of them standing there, David J. and I think 4 other people. And I ended up getting invited to go out to dinner, and we went out to dinner, and I developed a relationship, not just with him, but with a couple of other people there. And, when I say develop a relationship, I would say they're just touch points. A lot of people that you meet, it's just a matter of those touch points, and you keep doing it over and over again. But eventually, one of the other guys that was at dinner, I met him quite a few more times, and he ended up being the head of, at the time, the largest photography convention in the United States. So it's all from that position of putting myself out there, pretending I lost my sunglasses just so that I could get in, that touch point in those relationships with these people. And it wasn't even necessarily like there was a groundbreaking thing that happened with those people. The groundbreaking part was that I realized I had to create those moments. They wouldn't always come to me. And the more I made sure I put myself in the path of luck, I guess, as they say, that's where all those moments, those connections, and eventually those big breakthroughs in my career happened.
Like, people need to listen to that story one more time. But coming towards that, I think Matt and I have found that sometimes what stunts our own growth is the room we're in. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at, is like, you almost have to surround yourself sometimes in a room where you're a little uncomfortable and you know that you are pretty much just there to learn. You're not there to contribute too much. And so when you got to that dinner, was going back to that dinner with David J. and the associates, did you try to act like a fly on the wall, or were you feverishly taking notes? Or were you fake it till you make it? What was that like?
I'm pretty sure I was just trying to play it as cool as possible, without anyone noticing how nervous I am or was. And that's even to this day. I'm very much an introvert. If I learned anything, I always knew I was an introvert, and I would force myself to be outgoing and talk to people. I've done that with networking things. I've gone with a group of friends and realized, you know what, I'm just going to stand here with my group of friends, and this networking thing that I worked so hard to get invited to or paid to be at is going to be worth absolutely nothing, because I'm going to sit here with my friends. And I've literally said, okay, guys, I'm going to pretend I don't know you for the next hour. Okay, bye. And went around and introduced myself to random people. So it's a lot. I totally forgot the actual question because I started telling another story.
No, I love that part. And again, that's networking 101, but that's like networking 1. That's really, really hard. People almost skip past that whole point, because I know Matt and I so many times have gone networking events together and forgot to separate. And that's a good point. But going back to the question was more, at that dinner, were you trying to act like a fly on the wall, or were you trying to contribute? Like, what was the mindset in that dinner?
I'm pretty sure since it was after a talk, which can be very tiring. It was probably a 3-hour talk. There wasn't that much shop talk going on. So we're just talking, everyone getting to know each other. It definitely wasn't taking notes, maybe mental ones. And I wasn't trying to contribute. I was just trying to blend. It was also me and like 4 different guys too, which is a good thing actually. For me, I tend to be much more relaxed around men than I am around women. I don't know if it's the underlying, probably wrong misconception that all of us women are judging each other. So I have to like be proper. But it was fairly relaxed. And it was harder to go in and pretend I lost my sunglasses than it was to have the entire dinner. So that wasn't the hard part. It was the push to get there. That was the most difficult that I had to overcome.
I love that. We all are. I think credibility is critical for a lot of our industries, any industry, any business, but especially yours. I mean, I feel like if you don't have credibility, there's so many competitors out there. There's so much noise. You said it yourself. You can be bombarded by just hitting one hashtag and like following one thread of information. A couple things came to mind about like your credibility. Obviously, your volume and quality of work can't be replaced. Like that in itself is a credible position, a credible tool. Your following and social proof is clearly there. But when we met you had shared a little bit about your relationship with Canon and the enterprise relationship that you kind of had. Do you feel like that was a credibility push, or do you think that was not as important as some of those other things that I might have touched on?
It depends on who it's to. So I have 2 different audiences. I have my clients that are my wedding clients. Do they care that I'm a Canon Ambassador Explorer of Light? Maybe they read it in my byline and they're like, oh, that's cool. She's somebody. But at this point, I think all photographers have something in their byline where it's like top 10 photographer chosen by blah, 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 or award-winning photographer. Meanwhile, like their mom gave them that trophy. I don't know. Like it's hard to say that. I don't think it swayed any decisions of my clients whether to hire me or not. On the flip side, it does add more credibility when I go to speak and when I can say that. But for me, and since I've met you, I've actually, you guys met me when I was doing a wedding tour with Canon, and I wasn't an official ambassador yet. And now I am. Now I'm a Canon Explorer of Light, which is what they call it. And for me, that meant more to me personally than anything that anyone else is going to attribute to that name. So that gives me confidence. Any relationship that I have with vendors, it gives me confidence, and then it just opens doors. I get to play with new gear before anyone even know it exists, which is the coolest thing in the world. It also helps my YouTube channel because then I can create videos that are ready for launch day for when these products are launched. And then I just get to have more fun because I'm kind of in that circle of helping people drive the industry that I'm in. So it's just a lot of fun.
Sorry, and this is probably more of the question issue than your answer, but so from the Canon side, that helps you with your credibility when you go on national speaking opportunities, you go on stage, get that. With your clients who hire you or purchase a course or hire you to actually do work for them, what do you think matters most to them?
I think what matters most to them is whether I can deliver the information that they want in a clear and concise manner. Because yeah, it's nice that I have, that credibility or social proof or things like that. And that might be help the buying decision. But ultimately, if I'm not delivering the headline that I've claimed, they don't care, and they're going to be mad about it and give a negative review or a thumbs down on YouTube or a mean comment.
Yeah. On that, I think off of Matt's question, we're all at some way a vendor to somebody else. That's kind of how we can call ourselves an insurance agent or a wedding photographer, but we are a vendor for their moment. Insurance agents were a vendor for them to close in their home. Wedding photographer, you're a vendor for their wedding, for their big day. And as a vendor, I think the biggest thing is expectation setting. If you commit to doing something, that you follow through with that. But you don't always. And there's going to be times that you're off track. How do you deal when someone's been waiting for their photos or whatever, and it goes awry? How do you communicate that, and How do you deal with expectation setting?
The biggest way to deal with expectation setting for me is always that, under promise, over deliver. So I know it takes, I don't know, 2 weeks to get photos back from a wedding. I'm going to tell my clients it's going to be about 4, so that I'm always giving myself a buffer for all those things that happen and things I can't fulfill. But like you said, sometimes things just slip through the cracks. So I think it was 2 days ago, one of my clients, for some reason or another, when I delivered all her albums, I forgot to stick in that little USB drive that had all of her pictures on it. And it's like a duh, like, how does that even happen? But, my big thing is just like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Obviously giving them whatever it is that I'm going to give them. And then I, give them something else, for their trouble. Even if it's not my fault. A couple of weeks ago, I had a client whose album was super late in getting produced because the album company, moved, and then all this happened. And I, just gave her another free product. And then, after she received her album, she actually got another little gift from me. I kind of just look at it all as relationships. If I screw up, or, my husband screws up, he's going to bring me home flowers potentially. So I just do the same thing with my clients and try to smooth things over.
It's funny. People are pretty forgiving if it's not a major major issue. People are pretty forgiving if you just ask for.
They are. Yeah. And, most people are reasonable too. They understand things go wrong. And as long as you've been treating them well the entire time, they know it's an anomaly and they're not going to crucify you for it. They're going to be understanding as long as you're apologetic and wanting to make it up to them and not acting like it's their fault.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Vanessa, as you spoke earlier, it dawned on me that your sort of career and your sort of journey is actually quite similar to our journey, in that you spent the first, call it, decade or so in your craft, delivering your end user with the product that they needed, service they needed, and then you shifted into more educational consulting, knowledge-based content. We did the same. We were really in the insurance space for a long time, delivering the said solutions. And then we shifted into consulting, coaching, facilitating, other quote unquote competitors to do a better job in their world. That's challenging when you get to the place where you're doing both. It's challenging to both deliver at a high level to your clients as well as delivering education and content on a regular basis. How have you found you've been successful at managing that, and have had any issues with doing such?
I am successful at managing that only because of the people around me. So I have my husband that helps me do all the content creation. We also have an editor. I have an office manager that helps run my wedding photography business. There is no way I would be doing this by myself. I think it would be impossible, or if not impossible, I think other parts of my life would suffer. And then there's also the problem of what you're really enjoying at that moment, because it goes back and forth. And I've definitely seen the pendulum swing back and forth, where I'm doing really well on the speaking side. And that means, oh crap, I only have 2 weddings booked for next year. What is happening? Now I need to really push to the other side to make up for that. And I've had that swing back and forth, but I think as long as you recognize it and you see it and can plan for it, you can try to keep, the clock handle in the middle. So you're not swinging too much one way or the other way. And it takes a lot of planning, and I think a lot of support around you.
So you, what I hear over and over as you explain different answers is your creativity. I mean, that's kind of, it just feels like that's your backbone, is that you are creative. So you answered Matt's question with a creative solution. Like, that's kind of how you really did. But I listened to a podcast recently where it was discussed about how people who are homeschooled are in general just more creative. And in general, just in general. And can you talk a little bit about your homeschooling and kind of the impact that may have had on you?
Well, I was homeschooled for 9 years. I didn't particularly like it, though I think it's different from being homeschooled now. Back when I was homeschooled, there were neighborhood kids and we would all go out and ride bikes, after school. So I wasn't like totally secluded, but I was very bored. I also had a younger brother who had a little bit harder of a time reading when he was, first started being homeschooled by my mom. So that meant that I was left to just do my schoolwork a lot of times by myself. Now, I definitely remember being like mad about that, or being like really lonely and depressed, but ultimately that's what formed me to, who I am today. I'm able to problem solve. I'm able to work on my own. I'm self-motivated, self-starter. And it's because of all of those things. People ask me all the time, if I would do it again or if I would homeschool my kids. And I usually say no, because I remember being like super depressed. The most exciting thing that happened all day was like the mail came, and it was like, back when the publishers clearinghouse would send you stuff and I would like put the stickers on and send it back. Like that's the most exciting thing that happened in my day. But ultimately, again, that hard, difficult time of being secluded and homeschooled and having to work on my own shaped me to who I am today. So would I take it back? Probably not. Am I going to homeschool my kids? No.
When do you feel most creative now?
I feel most creative now when, I don't know how to explain this. It's not when I have nothing to do, but I give myself whatever task it is that I'm doing. So, when I am able to get that idea in my head of the thing I want to do and actually sit down and get to do it when I want to do it, versus getting that idea in my head and then writing it down later, for later. And then I look at it later and now it's just a task item that I have to do, right? So being able to have that freedom of just, this is really cool. Let's do that really cool thing right now. And it's probably because I don't have as much patience as I would like, but that's when I feel most motivated, when I've got that idea and I can do it right away.
So as you feel inspiration, you kind of again, as a creative person, you run towards it. You don't run away from it because you're scared of it. You run towards it because it's just almost like an itch you want to scratch.
Right. And then probably not, I have a friend of mine, he calls me the juggernaut. So I'll just go and go and go. And it's not necessarily a great thing because I break things sometimes because I'm going too fast or I don't do it as well. So there's flaws in that, but I do like being a juggernaut.
Yeah, it's definitely a way to be productive and fail forward, as they say. If you're like 3 years out, I guess this really kind of is based off of whether or not you are goal-oriented or not. I mean, you could be very driven and not goal-oriented. You could be very goal-oriented, not as driven, So actually speak to that first. Like, do you have set goals that you kind of set for yourself on an annual or quarterly or a long-term basis?
I don't write them down. So I don't do the 5-year plan or the 1-year business plan, but I do have in my head milestones that I want to reach and that I want to go for in a specific period of time, because I think that's beneficial to have. But then I also have those lofty dreams, like being a Canon Explorer of Light has been a dream of mine since 15, 20 years ago. So that is something that I've always worked towards. I've always had in the back of my mind, but there was no real way to put like a definitive timeline on that one because most of it was out of my control.
For those that actually stay on that for 1 second, I think the thing that you said you're most proud about is making that achievement, or getting that achievement. Can you just talk a little bit more about like what it means to be an Explorer of Light, like how many there are and how long it takes, how do they qualify and like chose you?
Yeah, there are 33 Explorers of Light in the world out of the millions of photographers. And how they choose that, it's a lot of things. It's obviously the quality of your art, but it's also being able to trust you to represent their brand. It's building a relationship with them. It's being able to execute on, all the different marketing things that they are going to need you to do. Be able to teach is one of the big things so that I can go on stage and represent them at, different platforms or their own platform at trade shows. So it's a lot of different things. And it's always a moving target, I know social media was a big target of theirs over the past year or two. Before that, people that were Explorers of Light were taken on and they had very little social media following, but that was okay. So it always moved. And I think even just the flexibility of being able to move and meet goals that they didn't even know they had was probably part of it. But it does all come down to relationships. I worked really hard to find those relationships and nurture the relationships and, help them so that eventually they would trust me enough to give me that title.
So that's one of the most impressive titles I've ever heard, by the way, Explorer of Light. Like
it just sounds amazing.
Well, I mean, like part of me didn't want you to describe it just so I could just imagine just something just different that I even understood. But I love that title, Explorer of Life, and I'm glad you said that. But Now that you are on that spot, one of the questions that was going through my mind as you were talking about that is, who would you say is living your ideal life? Like yeah, I mean, it's just an interesting thing is you're at a point, you achieve something that most people cannot do. So right now, who is living your ideal life?
Oh, like somebody that I look up to and as my next step. Um, it's hard. And that's almost another way of, who's your inspiration? And I never answer that truthfully because truthfully, I just don't have like that big person that I look up to. I like this about this person and that about that person. And ultimately, when I look at anyone who's doing better than me, maybe I'm a pessimist, but I just think to myself, you don't know what's happening behind closed doors. They could have that income level that I absolutely want, and that's my ideal lifestyle, and could be spending most of it on Xanax. Like, you just don't know. And therapy. It's hard for me to kind of look up to other people. Whoever is living my ideal life, I couldn't pinpoint it to a person. I could pinpoint it to characteristics and things that I hope for my life in the future. But as far as a person, that's always been a hard thing for me to grasp. I'll just say Jesus. Jesus is living.
Well, it's a good answer though, and everybody has a different answer, by the way. Some people would say like Elon Musk if they're an entrepreneur and they're working 9,000 hours just because that they might admire that person. That's a different point. But it's when you are 1 out of 33 and you've achieved a really lofty goal, and I'm serious, it's such an incredible accomplishment. It's interesting. Your answer was not, I don't respect or admire other people. It's just, you're kind of happy where you are while striving for another place. And it kind of goes back to your creative ideas of just, you're kind of willing to just keep achieving.
Right. That would be my goal, to keep achieving.
If you did, kind of coming back to where I originally started, if you did look 3 years out and you look backwards and said, I feel like I accomplished really a lot in the last 3 years. Do you have that kind of picture perfect scene of what you'd be doing on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, like what your life would look like from a professional standpoint? Yeah.
I would say I'd probably be working a little bit less hours on the annoying things. So, for example, I love the video content creation. But what it takes to get to creating that content is I have to be my own producer. I have to book models. I have to make the scheduling timeline. And I don't get to just concentrate on the content itself. And I think my content would be better if I could just concentrate on it and develop it versus having to develop all the logistics around it. So if I were to look in 3 years, that's what I would want. I would want to hire someone who's an actual producer that produces all these days for me and filming days and, helps negotiate sponsorships because I do most of that right now. So just all the day-to-day stuff so that I can concentrate on what I actually want to do, which is educate and create and not have to think of all the paperwork. I need someone else to do my paperwork.
No, I love that. I love that you focused in on just spending time doing more of what you love, and that's going to magnify the value you offer, opposed to killing everything and I'm going to be in this different stratosphere of what I'm offering, right? It's such much more of like what you love. I want to do more of it.
Definitely.
What scares you?
I think any form of instability scares me. So I'm definitely a control freak. So I would say right now is scaring me, but not so much because I've prepared for stuff like this. So I'm not out of control right now. But ultimately, I think that's what scares me, is just throwing everything I have against a wall and nothing sticks. So I can't control the outcome because it is 100% out of my hands. So that kind of instability is what scares me the most, because what am I going to do? I'm just going to sit down and be like, okay, guess I'll just take this.
I like that.
When we were going through the sort of, because it wasn't like one day, the pandemic is sort of was a ever evolving, changing animal in the last month, 2 months. Was there a moment when you realized like I really have to pivot and shift, and I have to create something different, or I have to do something different than what I normally do, or did you sort of gradually move with that?
I'm gradually moving right now, so we're hopefully at kind of the tail end. So, and I have those two facets of business. So like I said, I've prepared for this. So the weddings, they're just not happening. And I just kind of have to take that as it comes, and there's not much I can do about it. But on the other side, the YouTube, the content creation, I can go full force. I can create new content. I can put things on sale just to generate some cash flow. It has been like a day-to-day, week-to-week pivot, but that's okay. I think I'm okay with that, because at least I have options. I'm moving and I can go here, or I can go here and here, and 2 out of 3 of them might work, but I might find an avenue this way. So that's just kind of every day the course I'm taking.
I love that.
I don't want you to bash your competitors or colleagues with this question, but I'm going to ask it anyways.
Okay.
What are bad recommendations you see in your field? Or what are bad recommendations you see moms or dads just kind of making that you're just like, you scratch your head and you might want to just make a video right away about it?
The biggest one, as far as the content side and creating education, is people leaning towards fixing it in Photoshop, or preferring the Photoshop look versus a clean photo that was taken in camera, that was done right in camera, that doesn't need Photoshop. So you look at all of my work, I very rarely touch Photoshop. And if I touch Photoshop, it's to, like, I don't know, take a piece of garbage off the floor. It's nothing that's like actually editing the photo. So that's one of the biggest pet peeves, and it kills me. And I guess it kills me on both sides, because I've got photographers, even some that are like teaching photography, and they're not actually teaching photography, because they're fixing their errors in Photoshop or Lightroom and then posting it, as opposed to fixing it in camera. And if you want to teach Photoshop, great. Just admit it's Photoshop, not photography. That's fine. Sometimes it's a marriage between the two. And on the other side, like the weddings, that's a constant struggle, because we have to constantly educate our clients. And I think for a little while I was trying to educate them on the photography itself, but that's worthless. They just can't see the difference between good and great photography. They don't, but they know the difference between good and great experience. So I try to highlight that and teach them about that versus, telling them to stay away from Photoshop artists, because that's also not bad. If that's what they like, that's what they like.
I've always wondered this, so thanks for helping me figure it out. In our world, in the insurance world, like health insurance and life insurance and auto insurance and disability, they couldn't be farther away from each other. I mean, someone might say they do multiple types, but they're all very, very different kind of services or products that are offered under the umbrella of insurance. In photography, I almost felt that same way when it comes to architecture, studio, weddings, etc. Is there a huge divide? Like, can you, if you're one type of photographer, can you make that move, or is it really just siloed expertises?
I think it is siloed. So for example, if you are selling health insurance, right? You have a license for that. To sell term life insurance, that's a different license. That's a different, understanding than to sell errors and omissions insurance. Like, there's all these different things. Yes, there's some similarities that go across the board. Yes, you're still using a camera for every single type of photography, but there are different things you need to know. So I would never hire a food photographer to photograph my wedding, right? And nobody would. But maybe you would hire a fashion photographer to photograph part of your wedding. That's actually what the royal wedding, I always forget their names, Markles. That's what they did. They hired this guy, Alex something, and it was a big uproar in the wedding industry. This guy's a fashion photographer. He doesn't know about photographing weddings. But meanwhile, he was only hired to photograph like a couple of pictures. He didn't really photograph the entire thing, apparently. So you can do it, and you might do a good job, but you probably won't do as good of a job as somebody who's actually experienced in it entirely. You might have a fresh eye, though, because there is that aspect to it.
I love that answer.
Would you ever go to a fashion photographer, as Matt just alluded, and get advice on some of your work? I mean, to get a fresh eye?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I actually enjoy looking at fashion photography or special effects photography, even looking at wedding or cinema, like looking at a romantic movie and looking at the lighting in there. You can learn a lot from those other genres.
Speaking of lighting, your lighting shifted halfway through. Is that like intentional, or did you just?
It's a cloud. No, it's just a cloud. So what happens is the light comes in and out. I'm on auto exposure and auto white balance, and it's a really good lesson actually on lighting what's happening right now.
Yeah. I mean,
on color, temperature. See, it's coming out again.
So going back, you said something pretty interesting on good versus great experience. That's something you highlighted. You would give a recommendation, focus on elevating from good to great, as the Jim Collins book. But how much do you focus on like your pricing or to meet someone's budget versus highlighting how great your experience is? How do you juggle that mix?
I'm never going to have somebody that has $4,000 for photography spend the $10,000 average on me. That's not realistic. However, if somebody's maybe around $8,000 on their budget, I could convince them to go to 10 if I'm showing them my value and if I'm showing them the experience. But it's very difficult because right now it is extremely difficult, and I don't even want to do it necessarily, to get people into my really pretty studio, almost never. So then either we do a video chat or just a phone call, and they're deciding to book me based on one phone call and probably just looking at my social media. So it's very difficult. I constantly have to think of how to throw out value there or how to cast a wide net to get people in my door and to get people liking what I do. It is not the easiest thing in the entire world because people are taking a lot less time to decide what vendors are going to work with for their wedding, but they're taking a lot less time to have personal interaction with them. And I think that's where I am really good at. When I finally get somebody on the phone, they can hear how excited I am. They can hear me problem solve or walk them through their day. And then they can see how I'm going to be an asset to them throughout the entire experience. But if they just go on my social media, they may or may not. They just go to my website, they may or may not. So it's definitely a difficult thing to do, to convey that to everyone. And then, of course, managing their budgets at the same time.
In that connection with the potential buyer, have you refined your process many, many, many times over to make sure that you're giving like a consistent quality experience from the very beginning? Or has that been like you changed something in 2015, it's working since then, you've just kept it the same?
I keep things that are working. I experiment with either new things or things that aren't working, and I'm always evolving it. More recently, I've evolved kind of the back end of how I gift my clients. I give my clients gifts all the time, but I used to do it in the office, and now I outsourced it. And it's a better experience because they write personal notes and have way better handwriting than I do. They package everything nicer. It gets out on time. I don't have to worry about it. So then I can focus time being creative elsewhere. So I'm always trying to make things better and kind of one up everyone. I actually had a client get one of those gifts recently and post on Facebook, thanking me about it, or no, Instagram, post on Instagram about it and thanking me and post the picture of whatever it was I gave them. And then she used the hashtag, "My photographer is better than yours." I'm like, that's what I wanted.
Oh, so I wrote down work ethic, creativity, humility, but I think maybe competitiveness should be added to the list.
Oh yeah. I'm competitive in a good way, in a way where it's, it's not against other people. It's always for me.
What are some of the examples of gifts that you give? I mean,
I give usually 3 different gifts. I give a gift when they book with me, which right now I'm giving a custom engraved cheese board. So it's kind of like vintagey looking and has their names and their wedding date in it. Although now that's fun because that's changing for a lot of people. So there's that. The second gift I give them is like a wine cooler tote, and it's like a really nice leather bag. And I give it to them a couple weeks before their wedding. So it's almost like a honeymoon bag that they can bring with them also. And then when they're leaving me, I call it the goodbye gift. I've done a few different things. I've done things with pictures that I've given them in like really pretty mats and displays and shipped that. I've done ones where I give them coffee cups, which is my favorite, and I'm going back to doing that one. And they get 2 coffee cups, either, having their initials on each of them or just generic, cool looking coffee cups. And I send them a little note with it that somebody actually did for me when I first got married. And I tell them, you have to have these coffee cups out in visible plain sight. And you are only allowed to use them when you are sitting down with your spouse, without your phones, without distractions, and spending quality time together. Mm-hmm. And it's to serve as a reminder, because I know I look at my coffee cups that I have that a friend of mine gave me, and I'm like, haven't touched those in like 6 months. And then it's a constant reminder. So I always want to gift them not just useful things, but things that are going to help their relationship overall. Because I want to show them I don't care just about their wedding. I care about their marriage.
I love that. And I'm sure that comes through from the very beginning when you're working with somebody.
Hope so.
Well, you got to stay on that theme the whole time, right? And it's almost like forcing you to stay on theme and stay in character. Because if you give those,
very helpful if it's actually your character and it's genuine.
Yeah, but if you gave those coffee cups and they'd be like, "Wow, Vanessa actually cares about me," that would be bad. But you gave those coffee cups and it's a reminder that you've cared about them the entire experience. It just fits who you are. That's perfect. That's perfect. That's true. I like that. Well, I gotta ask one more random. I only have one more question on my list here. COVID. This is always a question I ask people, but COVID's really inspired it a lot more because we're at home now. What absolutely has to be in your fridge at all times?
My fridge, Greek yogurt, actually.
Perfect.
That might be a first, Zach.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I always have plain non-fat Greek yogurt. Yep. Probably going to go have it for lunch.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. This has been, I know Zach and I both probably have 2 full pages of notes, not just for our professional reasons, but personal reasons, things I noted down. And I think your humility shines through. You're extremely well-spoken and very articulate, and that helps understand a lot about you and kind of how you tick. So I know from both of us, we really appreciate the time and the quality of time that you've given us.
I'm glad to hear it.